What is your never interrupt an enemy while they're making a mistake moment? Story 1. I was doing a mortgage for a French guy in Miami Beach that had a French realtor. Even though both were completely fluent in English, she frequently made snides in French, having no idea I spoke the language. When they settled on a property and we were riding the elevator down from the condo, she told the client, "Look, these guys are scumbags and they're going to screw you over, and I have a much better person that you can work with," even though the way foreign investment works is identical throughout the state. Towards the end of the ride, I tell the guy in fluent French that we would be happy to compare our proposal with whatever her people would come up with, and it's his choice, but we would certainly like to work with him on this and any future investments. He starts laughing his butt off, and she was completely mortified. He went with us and fired her as his agent, on the spot. When I was training a friend I hired at a store I used to manage, some customers were talking smack about us in Maltese, of all things. My friend was surprised to have a use for the fact that she was fluent in it, and started asking them if there was anything wrong in their language. They got super embarrassed and left. I didn't even mind losing the sale. I think it's safe to say you can't ever assume someone doesn't speak your language. Don't get too comfortable. Story 2. I let the lady who changed lanes into me run her mouth about how I rear-ended her before pulling the cop aside to show him my dashcam footage. I did the same thing, but for another dude. The right lane was gradually coned off due to fixing some potholes. A lady went all the way up to the last second and then cut this dude off. He hit his horn and she brake checked him. Bam. This lady was, I don't even know, on the phone, hysterical about how this guy was screaming and threatening her and she didn't feel safe. I waited for the cops to do their thing and then stepped up. They said, "Nah, we got what we need." I said, "Watch this. Uno reverse card." The scary part is they didn't care about the evidence. I once came upon 2 car crash moments after it happened. They both had passed me going up a hill and crashed on the other side. When the police came, they talked to one couple and let them go, then came to talk to the other couple, whom I was sitting with. Found out the first couple said she was driving. The thing is, when I came up, she was in the passenger seat and he was running away through a field. Too many cops are lazy. You gotta think before you go around blaming someone for what you did. Story 3. Years ago, I worked extremely hard on preparing a presentation for a tech conference. It would be my first speaking gig. I was nervous as hell. I practiced, refined, and got advice. I practiced some more. My manager was generally a nasty woman, but she was supportive of this, though she never once saw or heard my presentation. We traveled to Vegas, and it turns out there was a far greater demand than they expected, so they moved us to the main stage room. They were expecting about 500 plus walk-ins. I was 10 times as nervous. Well, immediately prior to the start, she noticed a very well-known media person and their photographer sitting in the front row. She got all excited and insisted that she was going to co-deliver it. She even went so far as to put her name on the title slide. So I, of course, was fuming. We go on stage, she does a decent intro before I step in. She keeps interrupting, so I just let her run with it. It reminded me of a morning show, a bunch of people with overwhelmingly fake smiles talking over each other. This was a deeply technical topic with a live demo. She fumbled each slide worse than the next, and then she got the live demo slide and froze. I had the wherewithal to let her die. It was gloriously brutal. We had a, let's say, confrontation after. I left within 2 to 3 months. She got fired shortly after. Oh, and the media people that she was prancing for left immediately before the start. I think they were just sitting there from the prior session. Perfect. It always feels good to see a narcissist get owned. I just feel bad the poor guy couldn't give the presentation of his life. Story 4. A guy stole a presentation from me. This is 25 years ago. We hated each other. When he started presenting, I realized I had made a huge error and didn't say anything. Let him go through it. Asked him about the error, but he couldn't answer. This was in front of the COO. Got fired, not just for that, but because he was an overall douche. This was before everyone was on PCs and had one printer in one room. That reminds me of a joke about a guy and his chauffeur pulling something similar years ago. The guy was an expert who was traveling the country, speaking to businesses and universities. One day, his chauffeur said, "I've heard you give this speech so much. I bet I can do it better than you can." The guy said, "Okay, the folks at the next stop don't know me or what I look like, just my name." so you pretend to be me and I'll wear your hat and be the chauffeur. So the chauffeur gave the speech and gave it really well, got a standing ovation. Then it was time for the question and answer part. The first question was an extended, in-depth one that took a couple of minutes to get through because of how specialized it was. When it was over, the chauffeur looked down and said, "Man, in all my years of speaking, that was the simplest question I've ever been asked." Just to let you know how easy that question is, my chauffeur is in the back of the room and I'd like for him to stand up and answer it. Again, folks, make sure you know what you're doing a presentation about. Otherwise, just stay back. Story 5. Not my story, but several years ago, my older brother was fighting for custody of his son with his ex-wife. As the first custody hearing date approached, they were exchanging unpleasantries over text, and my brother ended up saying something along the lines of, "I'm not continuing this conversation. I will see you on the 15th. The ex-wife told him, "The hearing is on the 25th, dumbass." So of course, instead of correcting her, my brother just allowed her to keep thinking it was the wrong date, and she missed the first hearing entirely. It became the first of many mistakes she made in the court system that eventually led to my brother and the woman who is now his second wife winning full custody of his son. Shoot, I'd frame a picture of those two texts and send it to her on the anniversary of their divorce. I have my own custody battle. When I split with my ex-wife, one of the main reasons she gave for me not being able to spend time with my daughter was because she was convinced I was going to take her to my parents' house. And my mom liked to smoke, only cigarettes but still, in the house. We arrived in court and I met her and her lawyer in the reception area. The three of us struck up a conversation mostly about the case, and in the course of that conversation, the fact that my mom had passed away a month earlier happened to come up. The look on her lawyer's face. It was clear this was the first time she'd heard about my mom's passing. My ex-wife, who was very aware of it, hadn't mentioned it to her, and this was obviously quite a vital part of their whole argument. Within 30 minutes, her lawyer had drafted an agreement about how we'd share custody of my daughter. I signed it, and we got the judge to effectively rubber stamp it for us. I just can't imagine not knowing the date to your own child's custody hearing. Did she get her attorney from Wish? Story 6. At my current job, part of my duties is to do trailer audits, make sure people are unloading/loading safely, and I was training a new member for the position to do the job. After a few weeks, it turns out that the other person wasn't doing any aspects of the job. Instead, they were just mingling like it was a cocktail party. When asked why they weren't doing anything, they said it was because they were never trained. Well, it turns out that due to past complaints about this particular person, management put them on a PIP, which means if they got any type of training, they were to have a piece of paper documenting what kind of training it was, who trained them, and management sign off, with all parties' signatures. When they pulled the file that said they were indeed trained in all duties of the job, they just sat there silent and were fired. They were fired because they pulled the same stunt in every department of the building, and mine was their last chance. Our live-in building superintendent is a complete mess, lazy as hell, and does a crap job. Blame the previous board, but we have a new board that includes me. Now, we can't just fire him because labor laws. We can't verify the previous board and property manager ever trained or informed him as to the standards and expectations. Ontario, Canada, not fire at will like so many US states have. So we had to officially inspect the building and then present him with and discuss standards and give him a period to meet the standards before we can let him go. Today is the end of his performance review. He made no improvement in his work until yesterday. Yeah, he thinks that will count, but no, it won't. Kind of funny, I took to drawing happy faces and schnauzers in the dirt and dust on surfaces to see how long until they were cleaned off. Building had been talking about it as in, WTF is going on. His story will end like your coworkers did. I mean, I'm all for workers' rights, but some people really do deserve to be fired. Story 6. Roommate's ex abandons their vehicle in front of my house. I tell them to please move it or I will have it towed. The vehicle suddenly has 2 flat tires. The ex then files a police report claiming my roommate had slashed their tires. Waited until the ex made their statement to the police about how we had slashed their tires and that is why they couldn't move his vehicle, and filed a claim against us in small claims court. Provided the police and the court copies of my and our neighbor's door cam footage showing the ex arriving in the middle of the night to slash their own tires. The cherry on top, the ex showed up in court wearing the same shirt as in the videos. The best way to deal with a bitter ex is to not deal with them at all. Justice served. Story 7. I was accused by a neighbor of reversing out of my drive and hitting his car. He gave me the date and time I had allegedly done it and pointed to a small scrape on my car that supposedly perfectly matched the location of the dent on his. This was 7 weeks after the alleged event, by the way. I said it wasn't me, but told him to contact his insurance and we'd see what they said. A few weeks later, I got a letter from my insurance asking what had happened, to which I responded with the date that I had bought my car and updated my insurance, 2 weeks after the supposed bump. He never spoke to me again, but I used to give him a cheery wave every time I saw him glowering at his window. I have a somewhat similar story. I was backing out of my driveway and this crazy lady who lived in my neighborhood pulled into my driveway and hit my car. Luckily, there was no damage, but she wanted to exchange insurance info. Later that day, I got a call from her insurance agency asking me what happened. After I told them, there was a slight pause followed by, "She pulled into your driveway? We'll call you back." This was probably around 2001 or so, and they have yet to call back. I was in an accident driving through Kentucky, and the lady was just obnoxious. She asked me if I was staying in a hotel. I said yes. She asked if I was worried about them giving my room away. I said no, and she grinned triumphantly and said, "So you have a credit card?" No visible damage, but she insists on calling the police. The officer arrived and she ran up and gave him a hug. I asked how he knew her and he grimaced and said she's my aunt. I asked for another officer and he said, "Nobody's getting a ticket and the report will say no visible damage. I'll give you a copy before you leave. If you want to talk to my boss, you can, but the thing you're worried about, you're not the one who should be worried." I did speak to his boss later, who said if she files against your insurance, send them to me. A few weeks later, I got a call from my insurance company and I start panicking and start explaining that the other driver was related to the officer. The insurance rep explained the officer included all 3 conflicting stories she told him. "We just want to ask for your description of the accident and your permission to file a complaint on your behalf." I don't know what happened, but I think back to that stupid grin and I feel contentment. If you're petty enough to try and commit insurance fraud, then you deserve whatever's coming to you. Story 8. During my very long and exhausting divorce, my ex-husband kept insisting he was ready to settle. We would schedule a conference with my lawyer and I, and then pushed papers around the table for 2 hours. He would just argue over petty details rather than actually discuss anything. This happened a few times. I was incredibly frustrated because I genuinely walked into this wanting to compromise so it would be over quickly, but that was never an option. Note that I hired a lawyer and he did not. He was convinced he could do it on his own better. So after a few rounds of this, I got the impression that he was trying to waste my money until I could no longer retain my lawyer, and then he thought he would have the upper hand. I made less than half of what he did at the time, and my lawyer's retainer fee wiped out my entire savings, so it was a very real concern. My suspicions were confirmed when one day, as we were walking out of my lawyer's office, he told me this word for word while chuckling. I passed this on to my lawyer, who actually cackled and told me, "Let him." It was then that I learned that we were 6 months out from being married for 10 years, and at that point I would be entitled to a sizable part of his pension upon retirement. She let him play his games for 6 more months without saying a word, and then finally took our case before a judge 5 days after our 10-year anniversary. Not only did I get part of his pension, but she also got the judge to order him to pay almost all of my lawyer's fees. The beauty of it was that it was 100% his fault for playing games. Since you were married for 10 years, you can also apply for SS retirement based on his earnings instead of yours. For me, that equaled an additional $500 per month. It doesn't diminish his SS retirement benefits, just upped mine. Nice. Best lawyer in the world? Probably. Story 9. Not an enemy, but in retrospect, should have been. I work as a teacher, and we had an ex-manager guy who decided to get into teaching late. He had lots of pretty horrible habits, eating other people's lunches, perving on the female teachers, squeezing people's shoulders painfully hard as a matey gesture, but the habit that this story is about is how he tried to use weaponized incompetence to get people to do his tasks for him. None of it was really important. He just seemed to enjoy talking people into doing things for him. So he comes up to me one day with a USB data stick in his hand. Apparently, it has a copy of a previous year's exam and that it was his responsibility to update and edit. He'd taken the file home and his daughter had done the update. Really, dude? Roping family into doing your paid government job for you? He wanted me to copy the file from the USB back into the server, replacing the original file he'd copied. It was literally click and drag between the USB and the file server. I flat out refused and said it was part of his responsibility and I was too busy with my own tasks. He proceeds to loudly and publicly proclaim to the entire staff room that I didn't understand how difficult it was for people of his generation to learn computer technology and that I really needed to help him out. That he was currently doing a computer course, but this, dragging a file between two folders, was too difficult for him to sort out. I let him go on for about a good 5 minutes about how horrible I was for not helping the poor helpless old man out until I just as loudly asked him, "How the hell did you get the original file from the server onto your USB in the first place?" You could have heard a pin drop in that staff room. He walked off and copied his own goddamn file. Man, what is it with older teachers? A guy started recently at our lab after being a teacher for a while and he just refuses to do his own thinking. Will ask of a piece of trash, so I just throw this away? Asked how to open a plastic bag. I needed something in the clean room and it took an entire minute to get him, the person assisting in there, to just say the works, "We need 4 more X on the walkie," because so I just say that, so 4 more X, and they'll know what I mean? He'll do a task correctly, go to repeat the task 30 seconds later and ask how to do it. It's mind-boggling. Yeah, old teachers can be a pain in the behind sometimes. It's fine to not be tech savvy, but when you're just using it to get out of work, sorry bud. Story 10. In a meeting with my project manager, who has not been in the office or worked a proper full day for months, she has increasingly been annoyed by people bypassing her to get things done by telling me and her other direct reports what to do. I was about to answer a question for stakeholders. She told me to let her speak 1 sentence and she will let me have my bit. I did as I was told, and she told the stakeholder a completely wrong thing about the system we were handling and made a complete fool of herself. She got sacked this month. Maybe you shouldn't try to be a know-it-all when you don't know anything at all. Story 11. It's so dumb, but so fun. Years ago, I worked in a cube farm office job, and I hated my desk arrangement. It was right in a high-traffic pathway, with my back to everyone, screen facing out, so anyone could just sneak up behind me lurking, peer over my shoulder while I worked, etc., which just really bothers me. I was the first person in my department anyone would encounter, and I was also very good at what I did, so people would just see me first and interrupt me constantly all day. While the office got reconfigured, and me and a bunch of other people in that area worked in a big conference room for a couple of days during the shuffle. The guy moving around all the cubicle panels was a good friend, so I told him to ping me the minute a back wall desk was finished so I could move my stuff there. He did, and I did. This other guy I was friends with saw what I was doing and followed me, so we claimed the back 2 wall desks across from each other. There was a super obnoxious senior developer who figured out way too late what was going on and got very pissed. Apparently, there was some old seating chart which no one had followed at all as they redid the cube section by section, and it had him on the back wall. So he grabbed his old seating chart printout and marched into the senior VP's office right then and there to complain. I heard him ranting and raving about the chart this and chart that. He needed to sit in the back to concentrate, blah blah blah. I just let him monologue for a minute or two because for some reason he was exceptionally frantic about it. At the absolute perfect time, I got up to go to the break room, and as I walked by, I poked my head in the office, chuckling innocently, and said, "Come on man, boss name is too busy for all this silly stuff. I'll move my desk. Who cares where we sit?" It was like a 5-second TKO. He immediately started stammering about how much he didn't care and how he insisted I just keep my stuff there. So I feigned indifference and said, "Okay, no problem." It was one of my greatest moments in petty office politics. You can't really blame the dev for being upset, but this was some poetic justice. Story 12. An old boss who was awful to me after I took an extra few days of bereavement. She was just not smart, so I emailed her a recap of a meeting we'd had about said days off. She responded not only confirming what she'd said, but throwing in a bit of racism. I escalated. I'd been at the company in a different location for 8 years with an outstanding track record, so I had some credibility. 2 to 3 weeks later, my team was called into a last-minute meeting where her early retirement was announced, and my colleague saw her crying in the parking lot later that day, her last day. I really don't hate anyone generally, but that made me so happy, and looking back, I still hate her. As someone with a large extended Jewish family, you'd be surprised how many supervisors and managers don't understand that I cannot give them a week's notice of a funeral. If you, as an office manager, find it hard to work around all kinds of different cultures, then maybe you're the problem and not the other cultures. Story 13. Our friend group had one guy I had personally cut off because he was a terrible drunk. Another friend of mine was having a cookout and decided to invite the guy I had cut off despite me saying he was going to do some stupid stuff. Fast forward into 2 hours into the cookout, the friend I had cut off from my life got drunk and decided it'd be funny to sucker punch a guy with Asperger's. Everyone was telling him how big of a piece of crap thing that was to do, but he laughed and shrugged and played it off as no big deal, as the Asperger's guy was holding back tears. I didn't have to do a thing. He showed everyone who he was. Everyone stopped interacting with him after that. Good riddance. Usually when you cut someone out of your life, they don't take long to remind you of why you did it in the first place. Story 14. When I was a teenager, a cousin of mine, Jenny, had a fight with her mom, Jackie. The fight was so intense that Jackie beat Jenny severely, so she called my parents asking for help and asked to live here for a while. At the time, that sounded horrifying, but we quickly learned that Jenny was full of it. Jenny was a drama queen and loved to stir up trouble, lied constantly about basically everything, and Jackie never laid a hand on her. We had heard rumors but dismissed them and believed her, until one incident. Mom always kept a few frozen pies in the freezer just in case company came over. Jenny took a pie from the freezer one day, ate the entire damn thing, and when Mom came home, she got angry because those pies were for company. She asked Jenny who ate the pie, and she said that I did. She yells at me. I came into the kitchen. She asks if I ate the pie. I say no and get yelled at for eating the pie. Jenny then proceeds to launch into telling this overly elaborate tale about how I took the pie and ate it, just to get her in trouble. She went on for like 3 minutes and my mom just kept getting angrier and angrier at me, while I couldn't help grin like a madman. 3 minutes later, she finishes her story and I point something out. It was a coconut cream pie that she ate. I despise coconut. I hate it and will never eat it. My mom knew this, and that's when the realization hit her. Jenny had a look of horror on her face. She got grounded for a month. That look on both of them is seared in my brain. Makes me smile when I think of it. The funny thing is, she tried it again 2 months later, this time eating a chocolate cream pie, but my mom didn't believe her. I can't believe I almost felt bad for Jenny in the start. She had me in the first half, that's for sure. Story 15. I used to live in an apartment that had a very old lease. College students basically passed this place's lease down like inheritance until it came to us, and legally the landlord could only increase the rent yearly by a small fraction of the current lease's rent. The exceptions to this were if the apartment was being renovated, in which case it would be her responsibility to accommodate us while renovating, or if it had been vacant for a year between leases. She knew our lease's rent was extremely low, and so wanted to get rid of us to jack up the rent on a new tenant. She sent us a letter about 2 weeks before our lease would be renewed saying she was renovating and we'd have to leave. Well, my roommate was not just a college student, but a law student, and he happened to know she had to give us a lot more notice than that, so we plainly told her we weren't leaving and she'd be welcome to take us to court, which she did. She told the judge she wanted to renovate, and the judge asked her for the new floor plan and a cost estimate of the proposed renovation. She had none of those things. When the judge asked why, she said she'd only decided to renovate a week prior. When the judge asked why she'd taken this decision after the legal deadline, 6 months notice is required to end a lease, she said she was only renovating so she could start a new lease on the property. The judge literally facepalmed at her response, dismissed the case, and renewed our lease with no rent increase for the year, since she hadn't presented us a new one with enough delay to contest it. We were just sitting there with our mouths open, bewildered that she could have been dumb enough to say the quiet part out loud straight to the judge. Being a landlord does come with a lot of responsibility, but some of them really do take it way too far. Story 16. When I practiced family law, I saw this often on the stand. Turns out if your opponent is crazy, most of the time all you need to do to reveal that is give them a microphone and mildly question their story. The best, however, was in motion to withdraw hearings. For context, I hated those hearings. I dreaded them. I already felt like a failure for having to withdraw from a case, 95% of the time because the client couldn't or wouldn't pay me, but sometimes because they turned out to be uncooperative and or combative with me. They were not difficult to win, however. Inevitably, if I simply asked the ex-client when and how they intend to write their retainer, they'd start listing off excuses about how they don't and never will have the money to do so. It's heartbreaking, but it also proves my point. The clients who were uncooperative, however, were the best. I'd read off a list of times they cursed me out, ignored my advice, and threatened me and my staff, then just waited. You could watch their blood boil on the stand, followed by completely unhinged just justification as to why no lawyer could reasonably work with this person. Mr. Jones, can you explain why you threatened to shove a phone up my paralegal's behind if she called you again? She calls me every freaking week with another freaking thing that I have to do. You're supposed to be handling my case. It's why I hired you. I don't have time to be searching through my emails and getting bank records and bringing you papers every damn day. And every time my retainer is empty for like a day, she calls to remind me to refill it. I've got another thing to pay for, like the damned child support you put me on when I left. How rude can you be, right? Right? I swear if I have to hear her damned voice one more freaking time, I'm going to drive over there and slap the shit out of her. Your Honor, I rest my case. The phrase I've heard bandied about was that criminal court is where you see the worst of society on their best behavior, and family court is where you see the best of society on their worst behavior. I didn't know being a family lawyer was this tough. Sounds like absolute hell. Story 17. I was working as a cub reporter in a small town and had done a piece on a stray dog menace in some area. Plenty of dogs had attacked kids in a short while. The dog lovers of the town took that piece as an I hate all dogs article. They shared it on their WhatsApp group and started trash talking about me. What they did not know was that the admin of the group ran a dog shelter, and a few months back, I had done a piece on the shelter, so I was in the group too. At one point, they began scheming that they'd cook up stories about me lying in the story and complain to the publication. Mind you, these are upstanding citizens, doctors, lawyers, senior executives, so their word had weight against a rookie reporter. I just showed the chat to the editor. He had a good laugh about it. Never knew what happened after that, but hours later they stopped talking about me. The admin of the group apologized to me separately. He didn't need to, but never did tell them that I was a part of it. I think OP messed up a golden opportunity to say, "Do you know who I am?" Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story that you would like to share, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.